You ever try to explain something really important to someone and they just don't get it?
Like you're speaking different languages almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving in deep into today.
Okay.
How technical experts can actually talk to asset managers and have it make sense.
Especially when we're talking about critical infrastructure like power systems.
Yeah, that's the real deal.
Right.
Big stakes.
Yeah, so this is something that we're pulling from Power Systems Technology magazine.
Yeah.
There's an article called Asset Managers and Technical Experts, Divided by an Uncommon Language.
Catchy title.
It's by Tony McGrail.
Okay.
And he has some really interesting examples in here that I think will resonate.
I'm excited to hear them.
So just imagine you are an asset manager.
Okay.
And you're responsible for a power grid.
Right.
You got engineers talking about hydrogen levels and bushing power factors. And then you got executives talking about risk and return on investment.
Yeah, two different worlds.
Totally.
Yeah.
How do you bring those two together? Right. How do you even make sure everybody's on the same page?
Yeah. So this article starts off talking of something called the curse of knowledge.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of this?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So it starts with this example from Stanford University.
All right.
They have a game where one person taps out like a familiar song.
Okay.
Like,
Like Happy Birthday or something?
yeah, and the other person has to guess it.
Gotcha.
And the tappers almost always overestimate how well the listeners will do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they can't untangle what they know from what the listener knows.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
totally.
Cool.
It's like when you're an expert on something, you forget what it's like to not be an expert.
Right. You just assume everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And I could see how that would be a big problem in asset management.
Yeah, because you got these technical experts talking about all this stuff.
Assuming everyone's got the same level of understanding.
Yeah.
And most asset managers probably don't.
Probably not. How do you overcome that curse?
Well, the author McGrail, he really emphasizes this idea of using concrete language.
Okay.
So, translating complex jargon into like plain English, basically.
Yeah, so like almost creating like a dictionary where everyone agrees on what these terms mean.
Yeah, a shared vocabulary.
Yeah.
And just as important, you need a feedback loop.
Okay.
The experts need to constantly be checking in with the asset managers.
Asking, does this make sense?
Exactly. Are we on the same page?
And this article actually has some great examples of what can happen when communication breaks down.
Oh, I'm all ears.
Okay, so there's this one about a road sign in Wales.
Okay.
It was supposed to say, no entry for heavy goods vehicles.
Right, pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, but it accidentally got translated into like an out-of-office message.
What?
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Oh, when?
But it just goes to show, even something as simple as language translation can have consequences.
Big time. Especially when you're talking about something like safety.
Exactly. And it makes me think about this other example from the article,
Right.
where there was this pedestrian sign that had instructions in both Welsh and English,
Right.
but the instructions were actually contradictory.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, not exactly the best way to keep people safe on the streets.
No kidding.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into this other idea the article brings up, which is the importance of context.
Oh, yeah. Context is everything.
Right, like
Yeah.
we interpret information based on the situation we're in.
Makes sense.
It uses this example of a fire alarm.
Okay.
If a fire alarm goes off in your house,
Yeah.
you might just check the toaster,
Right.
But if you're in a hotel,
Yeah, you're heading straight for the exit.
yeah, totally different reaction.
Same alarm, different context.
Exactly.
But how does this apply to, managing a power grid or something?
Well, think about it like this. You get an alert that hydrogen levels are rising in a transformer.
Okay.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely.
But understanding the context is what helps you make the right call.
Like what kind of transformer it is.
Yeah.
What's its history?
Exactly.
What are the potential consequences if it fails?
So it's not just about having the alarm.
Okay.
It's about understanding what it means.
And having a plan.
Yeah.
Knowing what to do when that alarm goes off.
And that's where clear communication between the technical experts and the asset managers is so crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
And it's not even just about alarms and alerts.
Okay.
The article talks about this scenario where you might have a bushing monitor.
Okay.
And it's showing that the power factor is improving.
So that's good, right?
On the surface, yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah.
But a technical expert might need to step in and explain to the asset manager that
it's not as simple as it looks.
yeah, exactly.
There could be a deeper problem.
That this seemingly good news could actually be hiding something worse.
Like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, so it's really about making sure that the asset manager understands the nuances,
Right.
like the potential for data to be misleading.
You can't just take everything at face value.
Exactly. It's like, don't judge a book by its cover.
Love that analogy.
Okay, so we're starting to get into some of the complexity here.
Yeah.
And this leads into the next topic the article dives into, which is asset health indices, or AHIs.
Okay.
So this seems like a way to take complex data and simplify it into a single score.
All right, so that could be helpful for asset managers, right?
Potentially.
Yeah.
But the article cautions against just relying on that number alone.
Okay. I can see how that could be dangerous.
Yeah. So let's say you see an AHI of 60% for a critical asset.
60%.
Yeah. Does that mean it's about to fail?
Like, do we need to shut everything down?
Right. Like, what does that actually tell you?
Good question.
The article emphasizes that you really need to understand the data and the algorithms that are going into calculating that AHI.
Right. You can't just look at the number in isolation.
Exactly. You need the whole picture.
Otherwise, you're just making decisions in the dark.
Yeah, and that could have serious consequences.
For sure.
Especially when we're talking about critical infrastructure.
Absolutely.
It's almost like those AHIs can be helpful,
Yeah.
but only if you really understand the context.
Right. You got to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and the underlying data.
All of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. It seemed like that's kind of a recurring theme here.
Definitely.
That the numbers only tell part of the story.
It's never the whole story.
Yeah. And that brings us to another tool the article talks about, which is risk matrices.
Oh.
I'm curious about these because on the surface, they seem pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they seem pretty simple at first glance.
You've got probability on one axis and consequence on the other.
Right. So you can quickly see, how risky something is.
Yeah. What's the problem with them then?
Well, the problem is that they can lead to oversimplification.
Okay.
Like the article talks about this thing called categorization bias.
Okay.
Let's say you have two assets on a risk matrix.
Okay.
Asset one has a pretty high risk magnitude,
Okay.
but it ends up in like an orange box on the matrix.
What?
Asset two has a lower risk magnitude,
Okay.
but it falls into a red box.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So somebody might just focus on that asset too.
Right.
Just because it's in the red zone.
Even though asset one might actually be a bigger risk.
Yeah, because it's got that higher magnitude.
Exactly.
So those colors can be kind of misleading.
They can create a false sense of security or urgency.
Yeah. So it sounds like the real takeaway here is to not just rely on the colors of the matrix,
Right.
but to really dig into the details behind each risk assessment.
Look at the numbers.
Yeah. Understand the nuances.
The whole picture.
Yeah. And even then,
Yeah.
things can still go wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Even with the most thorough analysis.
Life is unpredictable.
It is. The article actually has a really good example of this.
Okay.
It tells the story about a power cable failure.
All right.
And it's kind of a classic case of a good decision,
Yeah.
but a bad outcome.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So there were these two transmission cables serving an urban station,
Okay.
and one of them failed.
Okay, so that's not good.
Yeah, so that put the system into what's called an N1 state.
N1.
Yeah, which basically means there's no backup.
Oh, so if the other cable fails,
You're in trouble.
yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
What happened?
So they analyzed the data.
Okay.
They looked at spares and lead times and the condition of the remaining cable.
Trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, and they determined that the probability of that second cable failing was actually pretty low,
Okay.
like 3 or 4%.
So they decided to risk it
Yeah, they figured they could operate in that N1 state.
while waiting for a replacement?
Yeah, but then 3 weeks later,
Uh-oh.
that second cable failed.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, so that brought the system down to N2.
Which means,
No redundancy at all.
oh, wow. That must have been a close call.
Yeah, but luckily they had developed mitigation plans.
Okay, good thinking.
So they were able to prevent a major outage.
Dodged a bullet.
They did.
But it just goes to show you can't always predict what's going to happen.
Right, even with the best planning.
So you always got to have a backup plan.
Yeah, and it's really interesting in this story how they involved people from different departments.
Like who?
Engineering operations management.
Okay.
Everyone was on the same page
Yeah, that's so important.
about the risks and the plan.
So that when something did go wrong,
They knew what to do.
they could jump into action.
Yeah, and it really goes back to that need for shared understanding
Right.
and clear communication.
Absolutely.
And speaking of clear communication,
Yeah.
Tony McGrail, who wrote this article,
Yeah.
he's a big believer in using analogies.
Analogies.
Yeah,
I like analogies.
to try and bridge that gap between the technical experts
Yes.
and the non-technical audiences.
Makes sense.
And he has this one analogy about power transformers that's pretty memorable.
Oh, yeah. I think I read about this one.
Yeah, the GMC Yukon analogy.
Remind me how it goes.
Okay, so he was giving this presentation about power transformer assessment.
Okay.
And he realized that a lot of the people in the audience couldn't really grasp what a 660 MVA transformer was actually like.
Right. It's hard to visualize that kind of power.
Yeah. So he asked them to imagine pushing a GMC Yukon SUV to the top of the Empire State Building.
Okay.
Can you picture that?
Yeah, I can see it now.
It would take a lot of energy.
A ton.
And then he said, imagine doing that with 99 more Yukons.
Wow.
And then dropping them all off the top of the building.
Oh my gosh.
The energy that would be released in that crash is roughly equivalent to the energy that flows through a 660 MVA transformer every second.
That's wild.
It is.
Suddenly, it's not just a number anymore.
Right, it's something real.
Tangible.
Yeah, and that's the power of a good analogy.
It makes it relatable.
It does. It helps you understand something complex.
By connecting it to something you already know.
Yeah, and it makes it more memorable.
And more engaging.
For sure.
Oh.
So it makes you wonder, what other creative analogies could we be using to explain complex topics in our work?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and it brings us back to that core message of this article.
Which is?
Whether you're a technical expert or an asset manager, the ability to communicate clearly and effectively.
It's so important.
It's essential for making good decisions.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're dealing with critical infrastructure.
Right, where the stakes are high.
Yeah. So what can we do as listeners to actually improve our communication in these kinds of situations?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And this article is focused on the power industry.
Yeah.
But these challenges exist everywhere.
In every field.
Yeah. So what can we learn from this?
Well, I think one key takeaway is to be mindful of that curse of knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Just because something is clear to us doesn't mean it's clear to somebody else.
We need to be aware of our own biases.
And assumptions.
Yeah. And I think that means actively listening to others.
Asking clarifying questions.
Making sure we're using language that everyone understands.
Don't be afraid to say, hey, can you explain that a different way?
Yeah, or what do you mean by that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's much better to ask up front.
Than to just let those assumptions fester.
And potentially lead to bigger problems down the road.
Yeah. And the article also talks about the importance of using concrete language.
Right.
Avoiding jargon whenever possible.
Jargon is the enemy?
It can be. You know, technical terms have their place.
Yeah.
But we need to use language that resonates with our audience.
Meet them where they are.
And remember, communication is a two-way street.
It's not just about talking.
It's about listening too.
Making sure that the information is actually being received and understood.
Exactly. There's this one quote from the article that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
It says, "The great enemy of communication is the illusion that it has taken place."
It's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You think you've explained something perfectly?
Right.
And then later you find out
that they had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah, they had a totally different understanding.
So how do we avoid that trap?
Especially with technical information.
Yeah, it's tough.
I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We got to be aware of our own biases.
Yeah.
And assumptions.
Like what seems obvious to us.
Right.
Might not be obvious to someone who doesn't have that same background.
Exactly.
It's almost like we have to put ourselves in their shoes.
Yeah, try to see things from their perspective.
And that takes real listening.
Active listening.
Yeah, not just hearing the words.
Right.
But really trying to understand what they mean.
And asking clarifying questions.
Oh, yeah. Don't be afraid to say, hey, can you explain that a different way?
Exactly. Or, what do you mean by that?
It's so much better to just ask.
Than to let those assumptions build up.
And potentially lead to bigger problems down the road.
For sure. And the article also talks about using common language.
Oh, yeah.
You know, avoiding jargon whenever possible.
Jargon's tricky.
It is. I mean, technical terms have their place.
Yeah.
But you got to be mindful of your audience.
Right. Like if you're talking to someone who's not a technical expert.
You got to use language that they can understand.
Make it accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about simplifying the language.
Oh.
It's about making it engaging.
Yeah.
Memorable.
So we've talked about analogies.
Yeah.
What are some other strategies we can use?
To help people really grasp these complex ideas.
Especially when it comes to technical stuff.
Well, think about how you learn best.
Okay.
Most of us don't learn by just listening to someone talk at us.
You're right.
We need to be involved.
Yeah, we got to be active.
So when you're communicating with someone,
yeah,
create opportunities for interaction.
Okay.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Encourage them to share their thoughts.
Get them talking.
Exactly. Turn it into a dialogue.
Not just a one-way lecture.
Right, a two-way exchange.
And don't forget about visuals.
Oh, yeah, visuals are powerful.
I think it can make such a difference.
Even something as simple as a diagram.
Yeah, or a flow chart.
It can really help people understand a concept.
It's like giving them multiple ways to access the information.
Yeah, and it appeals to different learning styles.
And remember, good communication is a skill.
It is.
You got to practice it.
Like anything else.
The more you do it,
yeah,
the better you'll get at it.
Absolutely.
So I think the big takeaway here
Yeah.
is that communication is not just about transmitting information.
It's about building understanding.
Yeah, fostering collaboration.
And ultimately making better decisions.
And that's something we can all work on.
No matter what field we're in.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found this exploration of communication in asset management
insightful.
Yeah, and thought-provoking.
And for our listeners out there,
yeah,
we want to hear from you.
What resonated with you?
What challenges do you face in your own work when it comes to communication?
Let us know.
Until next time. Keep diving deep.